Welcome to Beyond the Veil. Today, we have an extraordinary tale of the survival and transformation of David Ditchfield. He faced a life-altering accident that led him to an otherworldly realm. As he stood trapped in the train doors, he had no idea his life would change forever.
Hi, my name's David Ditchfield. I had an NDE and in 2006, which was to change my life dramatically. My story starts at a rail station in Cambridge. I was seeing a friend off, and it was a very cold February, and not a cloud in the sky, but it was cold. And I was helping my friend onto the car. And as I stepped back from giving her a goodbye hug and a kiss, we heard that the automatic door buzzer's going. So I stepped back really quick, but not in time. Unfortunately, part of my coat got trapped in those closing doors, and I couldn't put it free at all. It was like a thick sheepskin coat. I yelled out for help, hoping there would be a guard, but there was no guard on that actual route. So I tried everything. I was banging on the glass, and nothing happened whatsoever. And the engine started to roar, and I looked through the glass of the carriage doors, and I could see the look of sheer terror in my friend's eyes. And I figured at this point, wow, this is it. It's all over, because I didn't think I was going to survive if this train pulled out with me attached to it. The train pulled out at great speed. I felt every gear shift, and I lost my footing. I was dragged along the platform, and I was pulled between the flat platform edge and the speeding train, and under I went. I went under the wheels. It was like being thrown into this huge mechanical iron beast. It was like a washing machine at full spin, but it was violent, it was frightening, terrifying, it was aggressive. I went into fight or flight mode, as they say, and I decided to fight. I was not going to let this mechanical beast take my life. So I remained conscious throughout the whole experience, and I was eventually thrown between tracks, and the train was still continuing on. It was a very long train. So I remember thinking it's not over yet. So I kept my face down into the gravel, and the train disappeared off down the track. And there I was, laid in complete shock. I couldn't believe I was alive. I was in complete agony. The coat that I was wearing was now torn to shreds. And I remember the first thing I noticed was that my arm had been cut right open. I could see all the insides, and it wasn't good. And I remember thinking, wow, I need help now. And I tried to get my cell phone to call for emergency help, but of course my phone was completely smashed. But the emergency guys arrived really quick. They jumped down onto the track. They started cutting through my clothes, and by a miracle, they got me from the platform edge and into the back of an ambulance. And I remember the doctor saying in the back of the ambulance, he said, "Look, we've just come from a small hospital around the corner, but the one that's going to save your life is a 25-minute drive. Can you hang on in there?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go." So we sped off down the highway with the sirens going, and we arrived at the hospital, and there was a whole team of medics waiting there, and there was a lot of confusion going on. I couldn't understand what they were saying. It was all science, of course, to me, but I could hear fear in their voices, and I knew that it wasn't all over yet, because I realized I was losing an awful lot of blood. I could see it literally coming from my arm, and they worked on me as hard as they could, and I remember the surgeon who was in control of the whole situation, he seemed calm, actually. And he came over to me and he said, "Look, David, we're going to have to wheel you straight into theatre, but your family are here. Would you like to see them?" And I said, "Yes, please." So they came into the emergency department, and my friend Anna, who I'd been seeing off on the train, was there. So I was really pleased that she was there, because I needed to connect with her. I knew that she'd had to go through this ordeal with me, and I wanted to talk to her, and she came over. Her face was white. She was in complete shock, and her head was shaking from side to side. She said, "I can't believe you're alive. They announced over the speakers that you were dead." And I said, "I know." And I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yeah, I think so." And it was at that point that I left my body. I left the drama that was going on in the hospital, all the intensity of it all, the noise, the pain that I was going through was suddenly diminished. And I was in what seemed to be like a small, darkened space. It wasn't really a darkened space at all because I realized there was beautiful light starting to pulsate all around me. There are small pulsating colors of ambers, greens, yellows, and reds. And I felt a sense of calmness from these pulsating colors because I figured at this point that I hadn't made it. I figured I must be dead. I didn't try to fight it. I didn't try to resist it. I know that a lot of people who've had near-death experiences, I've since realized, do try to resist it, particularly people who've got young families to care for. I mean, it's not like I wanted to die, I didn't do, but after all that I'd just been through, I was quite, I don't know, I kind of happy to sort of go along with this. So yeah, I didn't resist it. I laid back on the hospital trolley. Well, I figured I was stood on that trolley, but I wasn't. I was now laid on this huge rock. It was like a huge granite rock. The best way I can describe it to you is being, it was like a medieval altar, that and it was interesting because normally that kind of something like that would be very cold and uncomfortable to be laid out on. But no, this wasn't. It felt very comfortable. And I looked to check my wounds and I looked down at my body and I realized I was no longer clothed. I was just covered in this blue satin silky sort of textured material, like a sheet, which comforted me and made me feel calm. There were no wounds whatsoever. There was not even a single scratch or bruise to my body. Everything was completely intact. I felt very reassured by this. And I laid my head back on this rock and closed my eyes. And as I closed my eyes, suddenly there was light coming through my eyelids. It was quite bright. So I opened my eyes. And there above me, coming in towards me, were these symmetrical grids of white light that were coming in closer to me. And I couldn't take my gaze away from this light, even though it was very intense and bright. Normally it was a kind of brightness that in this realm we wouldn't be able to look into. It was like gazing into the sunlight. But no, I could look into this light. And the reason I couldn't take my gaze away because I sensed that there was more than just light happening here. I felt there was a healing force coming from this light. And so I closed my eyes and kind of bathed in this light, if you will. And I felt that the light was healing me. It was healing the trauma that I'd just been through, healing the physical trauma that my body had been thrown into. And this was just a beautiful sensation. In a strange kind of way, I wasn't scared at all. And then I felt the presence of somebody close by, and I lifted my head and opened my eyes, and there stood at my feet was this person. It was an androgynous being, a person wearing a very contemporary black t-shirt and this kind of pure white blonde hair and skin that was like emanating light from within. And I knew this person. I looked at this person. I couldn't pinpoint where from, but I knew this person. And I said out loud, I said, I know you, don't I? Where do I know you from? And this person just stood and smiled at me with a knowing smile and didn't speak to me. But I was starting to get telepathy, if you like, coming through. And I was starting to realize that this person that I was looking at was was like my guardian angel, if you like. This was the gatekeeper to everything that was happening here. So I felt very safe in the knowledge of knowing that this person was here to protect me. And whatever was going to happen next, that was fine by me. So I laid my head back and closed my eyes further. And then I felt the presence of two more beings either side of me. I opened my eyes and there were two female forms. To my right, there was a girl again wearing a very contemporary long brown dress and with long brown hair and dark skin. Whereas the girl to my left was wearing a more traditional sort of outfit. She was like either Native American, Asian Indian, or South American, Brazilian maybe. And she had this beautiful dress on. But they had their hands hovering over the contours of my body, slowly going across every single contour. And I closed my eyes and I felt the energy coming from their hands. It was causing, like every single molecule of my body to vibrate with an energy of love. It was like this beautiful, unconditional love that was coming from their hands. And this healing energy was going far from beyond just healing, the physical form. They were going way down beyond. They were like taking off each sort of layer of hurt, emotional hurt or baggage, as we call it, from me. They were getting down, they were peeling all these layers off, and they were getting down to the pure essence of my soul. It was a beautiful, liberating feeling. I felt free. I felt freer than I'd ever felt in the whole of my life, and I felt complete. I felt like this was me. This was David as the real me, the core of me, without any guilt, shame, hurt, oppression. None of those feelings were there anymore. Then I started to think about my family because, I remember my mother had been in tears when she was in hospital. They'd all come in complete shock, of course. I'd been under a train. This was really terrifying for them as much as it was for me. So I tried to edge myself over and look down. And as I looked down, I figured I might see them, but I couldn't see them at all. But what I did see was this awe-inspiring sort of view. It was like a huge waterfall of stars, and it was the size of Niagara Falls, Victoria Falls, whatever, but instead of billions of tons of water cascading over the edge, there were billions of sparkling stars that were just falling over and tumbling. There were shooting stars flying over the top, and I was going, wow, I just kind of like, I was totally awe-inspired. And I looked down, and as I looked down, I tried to fix my gaze. At first I could just see stars sparkling, and then I could start to see colors forming, nebulas. And I was looking down. It seemed from one galaxy into another, and I was seeing formations that I'd never ever seen before in my life. I mean, before this, I never really had that much interest in astronomy. I'd look up at the sky at night sometimes and see the stars sparkling, but that was it. It was almost like a two-dimensional view for me of the universe. Whereas now, I felt that I was in the universe itself. I felt this huge vastness, not only of seeing what I'd seen, but I felt the force of the energy. I felt the energy of it. I felt that I was moving forward with this energy. And so I was more than happy to go along with this because it was so beautiful. And I laid my head back again onto this huge rock in the knowledge of knowing that I was part of this energy and this beautiful force. And the final part of this whole experience was the most profound for me. I started to feel this energy of love vibrating within me, but it became more intense. It was vibrating at such an intensity that I thought, what's happening? I had to open my eyes again and lift my head. And just beyond where that beautiful androgynous being was stood at my feet, a huge sort of tunnel of light that was coming in towards me through the universe. And it was surrounded by these very dramatic flames that were slowly circulating around the edge of this pure white light, a very, very bright white light. And I was being told now that what I was looking at here was the source of all creation. This was God, not God in the form of God that I'd always led to believe, in my school textbooks, the images of Michelangelo's of God on the ceiling of the Vatican with the long grey beard. No, this was God in the form of this huge tunnel of white light. And the love and force that was coming from this white light was just so beautiful and amazing and so liberating that I was laughing. I remember I just laughed to myself, and I threw my head back onto the rock. And just at that stage, I suddenly came crashing back into my body. I was back in the hospital, and the beauty of this white light was now it was now the fluorescent strip that was kind of screaming into my eyes, and the noise was just like overkill. It was like a shrill in my ears, and the pain came rushing through every single vein and muscle of my body. And it's odd because most people have said to me since, you must have been really gutted to have come back after all this beauty into the hospital. But no, I wasn't. I was still elated with this whole thing. I felt like I was still attached to this whole other realm that I just come back from. And I remember seeing my friend Anna and my family were stood there, and I just turned around to Anna and I said, something amazing has just happened, something really important that I've got to tell you. And I remember she put her hand over my mouth. She said, not now. You can tell me this later. And I said, no, but this is so important. I was just so charged. And she said, later, David, later. So I said, okay. So anyhow, they wheeled me into theatre and I was under for about 8.5 hours. And I remember coming around in the hospital room and I was just laid there on my own in the dark. And there was just like this little R2D2 type machine bleeping. And yes, I was processing the fact that I'd just been thrown under a train and I'd been through such horror. But I was more fixated by what had just happened, the whole experience of leaving my body and going to this beautiful realm and seeing what waited for us. And I knew nothing about near-death experiences at all at this stage. So I thought at this stage, is this just me that this has happened to? And I thought, I've got to tell everybody about it. I thought, I cannot forget this. I thought, how am I going to remember this? And how am I going to convey it to people? And I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a painting that shows what happened to me, the whole experience on a painting. And I thought it's got to be big, it's got to be dramatic, it's got to be like those Michelangelo paintings, like the big biblical scenes that he had portrayed. There was no, I'd never done anything like this before in my life, but I didn't care. I thought when I get out of hospital, that's what I'm going to do. So once I was out of hospital, I recovered at my sister's home with her young family, and I said I've got to do this painting. And so I managed to get a huge canvas. And I remember it was leant against the wall in the room that I was recovering in at my sister's house. And, I got myself well enough to do it. I was fixated on doing this. I had to do it. So I started this painting. And I was apprehensive at first because I got no training to be able to do this and I didn't want to mess this up. But once I started painting, I was amazed that how beautifully it was all coming together. I was like sort of when I was I remember when I first started painting skin tones, I was applying colors, greens, reds, blues, yellows, all sorts, whatever. I was throwing them on there, and these skin tones were coming alive. And I thought, I didn't know how to do this, and I realized I was being helped. I was being guided. I felt I was still attached to this other realm, like an umbilical cord of energy was still coming through me, helping me to put this painting together. You know, it took me weeks to bring this together, this painting, but every single day I would just sit back and look up and I go, wow, that's not just me who's painted this. And I would look up, as I still do, and I say, thank you for all the help you've just given me. It didn't stop at that, it was interesting because I'd started to have spiritual healing at a local spiritualist church because I needed to try and make some sense of this. And I knew there was a spiritualist church in the town where my sister's house was. So I went to the spiritualist church and they knew what had happened. In fact, they told me, they said, David, you've had a near-death experience. And they explained it all to me. But they also said, look, we do spiritual healing here and you look like your arms in a pretty bad way. You look physically like you could do with it. I said, yeah, when can I start? So in those healing sessions, some of the healers were clairvoyant and they would give messages to say to me, oh, we're seeing a blue light coming through you, of a healing energy that's healing you, and you're very well protected. But then they started to say, we're hearing music coming through. We're seeing a violin laid across your chest. And why is that? And I said, I don't know. And then one of them said, they're telling me that your guides want you to write a piece of music about your experience. I said, okay. So I went home and I got this old Spanish synthesizer up in the loft, and I got that down, and all I got was my dad's cassette recorder that I borrowed of him. And I couldn't play hardly at all, I was not trained, but I started putting some ideas down on that, and suddenly, like a beautiful passage of music came through. I was just watching a movie on the TV at the time. I thought, wow, what's this? And I recorded it straight away. And again, I knew I was starting to get help through. And I developed it to the stage where I thought, this is more than just a piece of music. I thought it was going to be a song that they were inspiring me to write, but no, this has got to be performed by an orchestra. And there was a lot of synchronicity happening in my life at that point. One of those moments of synchronicity was that I'd made friends with a cello player in the local orchestra. And we met for coffee one day, and she said, what are you up to? And I told her about this piece of music that was happening for me, and she was quite spiritual herself, and so she got it and she said, well, maybe we could perform it in our orchestra. I said, that would be great. My brother said to me, he was living down in London, and we chat a lot on the phone, and he said, look, if you're going to do this, you're going to need the orchestra will need music. They'll need score. And I said, I can't write music. And he said, well, look, I've got this app, and I'm going to give you an old laptop, and I'm going to give you this app and a keyboard. And he said, when you play your keyboard, instead of recording it into a cassette recorder, record it into this app, and it can transpose it into musical format. So that's what happened. The orchestra agreed to play it and perform it. And they said, look, would you mind saying a few words to the local press about your piece? I said, yeah, sure. So I spoke to the local press on the phone, and they said, hang on, you're the guy who went under the train, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And they said, this is going on the front cover of the paper. I said, brilliant. From that point onwards, the phone kept ringing, and the BBC got in touch and said, we'd like to come and do a piece for the news about your piece. And I said, fantastic. So, of course, after that, the concert sold out 2 weeks in advance. So the atmosphere was amazing at the premiere. You know, it was just like you couldn't hear a pin drop. It was a beautiful, beautiful atmosphere. I thought this is great. More and more people are going to get to know what it's like, because the first piece of music that I wrote was about my experience, and it was called The Divine Light. And I remember me and my family got the front row, and we sat there and we listened to the whole piece. And I didn't feel any sense of nervousness about it. I felt like I had complete trust by now that I was being helped, that this was going to happen, that it was going to come together. But it was more than that. I remember the baton coming down from the conductor, and those opening chords that I'd written on that little cheap synthesizer was now like a three-dimensional sound. And it sounded beautiful to me, and I could enjoy it because I knew that it was like it wasn't just me that had written this, you know. And it finished, and there was a beautiful round of applause, and I was hugging my mom again. She was in tears, but this time tears of joy. And then my sister said, David, look behind you. I said, what? And I looked behind, there was a standing ovation. People were stood and clapping. It was just amazing. From that point onwards, I started getting commissions from other orchestras to write music. And so I was inspired to keep working with my music and working with my art. I couldn't stop painting. I wanted to keep painting more and more paintings based on my experience. I wanted to share as much as I could, you know, both through my art and my music. So it was like I was able to give people, and still can give people, a sense of what happened to me in that afterlife in quite a three-dimensional sense, both through my art and my music. Then the third part of the puzzle was to happen. I kept being told, you know, again through these mediums, you know, that I've got to write my story. And I'm dyslexic. You know, I'd left school with very little qualifications, you know. You know, my life was in complete chaos up until the point of my accident. In fact, I was broke just before I was just about to be evicted from my apartment in London where I was living. So life couldn't have been much worse at that point. Anyhow, a friend got in touch with me who was living up in Scotland, so quite a long way off, and we hadn't been in touch for years. And she knew about my story by now, and she said, you know, when are you going to write it? And I said, well, that's what I keep being told, but you know, I'm dyslexic. There's no way that's going to happen. So my friends said, well, she'd never written a book or anything before in her life, but she'd written a few medical parts for medical journals. And she said, look, well, you could do with a co-author, and I could do that. I said, brilliant. So that's what we did. So we started working on my book. And we thought, well, we'll just self-publish it and, you know, and just put it out there. And I said, no, look, I think we need to reach a wider audience. That's what's happened with the music and the art. And I tried to explain to her how we've got to trust this and it will happen. And it did. A publisher suddenly got in touch at the 11th hour, just before we were about to self-publish, and said, look, I've just been handed your manuscripts and it's great. And I want to take it to the rest of the team. And I said, brilliant, please do, you know. So I got a publisher, and then my book called Shine On was released just before the pandemic. And I thought, well, we actually thought, what's going to happen now? You know, because there was no way I was going to be able to go out and promote it in bookshops throughout the UK. But I started to do podcasts and started to do interviews with people, and then the word started to spread, not just throughout the UK, but to the US and across the world. And I suddenly found myself talking to and reaching more and more people. And I started to realize that my voice was now becoming, I don't know, it was becoming more than just art and music. I was able to start to express myself through interviews and through people being able to read my story. I've gone from completely disastrously wondering where my life was going to go to suddenly realizing that life is in the present moment and that the present moment is the most important place to be. And that's something I learned from that other realm. I remember when I was laid on that rock, realizing that I'd spent so much time in the past worrying about, thinking about past mistakes I'd made, worrying about opportunities I'd missed, doors I should have opened, and all things like that, or worried about the future, worried about where my life was going to go. But in that realm, I felt complete because I remember thinking there's no sense of time here. In that realm, the only time is the present moment. I realize now that the present moment is the most important moment.